In today's episode of Today in World War II, April 6th, RAF Bomber Command decides they can no longer drop leaflets in Germany. The British African 11th African Division captures the Ethiopian capital of Addis Ababa. British and Australian troops are fleeing in the face of Rommel's heavy offensive. Uh, a combined force of Germans, Hungarians, and Italians invade Yugoslavia as punishment for the Yugoslavians leaving the tripartite alliance. And finally, off of the Dutch coast on the island of Texel, Georgian troops mutiny against their German masters, and all heck breaks loose. Let's get started. Okay, so on April 6, 1940, RAF Bomber Command decides that they're no longer going to drop leaflets, leaflet dropping missions in Germany. High Command, the British High Command had studied this extensively for a number of months, pretty much since this started in uh, September of 1939. So September, October, November, December, January, February, March. So 7 months. After 7 months of intense study, the British High Command came to the conclusion that dropping leaflets would not kill anybody. They realized that maybe, just maybe, now hear me out on this, okay? Maybe if they drop bombs, it might be more effective. But anyway, they're not ready to take that major step yet because once you declare war against an enemy and you're fighting against them and you're having uh, dogfights, you're bombing, or there's a full-blown naval warfare going on, but you can't really bomb them until something else happens, right? I mean, that seems to be their logic, right? In this whole phony war situation. So good for the RAF to finally figure out that leaflets don't kill. No, actually, maybe they could kill if you bundle them up really big and you encase them with something metal, and then maybe you put some explosive in there, and you could drop the leaflets, and then when they hit the ground, the explosive device could be triggered by a detonator, and then they could blow up, and the metal casing could actually leave shrapnel and it could do damage and cause casualties. And the leaflets would be there as well. So, maybe they'll get that point later in the war. On April 6, 1941, the British 11th African Division captured the Ethiopian capital of Addis Ababa. And as we see, I've been chronicling this for a few months. The colonial troops, a lot of them from Africa, Nigeria, especially from the Commonwealth soldiers in Africa, they did a hell of a job cleaning out the Italians in the Italian colonies of East Africa. Remember, you had Somali, nowadays it's called Somalia, and you had Eritrea, Ethiopia. So these are all part of Italian East Africa. Below that in Kenya and in Tanzania, you had British East Africa. And so that's what they were, that was the geography of this theater of the war. And like I said in previous episodes, the British pretty much used African troops to do this, and they did a great job. And it's a shame that in the grand scheme of things, they've been forgotten. The whole theater of war was forgotten, but it was actually very important because think about from the geography. Somalia, Eritrea, Ethiopia. What do they border against? The Red Sea. The approaches to the Red Sea, the Horn of Africa. And that was a lifeline, because it was very difficult to get supplies, merchant ships through Gibraltar and run the gauntlet of access North Africa and Sicily and Italy, and then Greece later after it got captured, and to get to Egypt. Well, they had to go all the way around the Horn of Africa and up. So imagine if the Italians could get their poop together, they could have seriously interdicted shipping into through the Suez Canal. So it was very, very important. But, luckily the British were able to handle them on their own with their Commonwealth troops, and that's what did it. On April 6, 1941, Rommel's heavy offensive is moving forward with great speed and with, of course, great tactics. And in the face of this, British and Australian troops were hurriedly evacuating from Barce and Derna, Libya, falling back towards Tobruk because they had to not be cut off by the advancing German troops. For example, the Axis captured Masous, Libya, which was a major fuel dump and a supply dump. Now, the Brits were able to at least destroy those fuel dumps before the Germans got there. That was good. That was kind of like a Miss Congeniality prize in a beauty contest. But it didn't matter because as we're going to see, Rommel's offensive is going to push them right out of Libya again, with the exception of Tobruk. And it's going to be interesting to see what happens with Tobruk here in the coming weeks and months. But right now, is on a high, and this is his first offensive, and he's going to make use of it. And I'm just going to say that what's going to hamper his supply? Probably Malta, and also a ingenious new regiment that's going to come into existence pretty soon. It's called the SAS. Anyway, on April 6, 1941, well, I told you before that the Yugoslavians had revolted, and there was a military coup against the prince who signed the agreement that brought Yugoslavia into the tripartite alliance with Hitler, which was his attempt to shore up his southwestern flank before his invasion of the Soviet Union. So you had Germany, you had Yugoslavia, Bulgaria, Romania, and you wanted Yugoslavia there as well. Well, after like a day or so after that was announced, there was a open uprising by the population and a military coup, and the new government said, "Nope, we are annulling this pact. We are not going to do it." So surprisingly, Hitler didn't take that very well, and I know that he was known for his patience and his long suffering. But for some reason, this time he made an exception and he gathered Hungarian and Italian forces along with the Germans, and they invaded Yugoslavia from a three-pronged or four-pronged approach. They invaded from Austria, from Romania, from Bulgaria, and Albania. And as always, at this time of the war, the Luftwaffe completely wiped out the Yugoslavian Air Force. It wasn't even a contest, of course. I mean, Yugoslavia holding up against the Luftwaffe in 1941? I don't think so. And they bombed Belgrade and killed 4,000 civilians. So this was payback. And as we see, Yugoslavia is going to be swiftly captured. But like a lot of things that happen in war, and we can see what happened when the second Iraq invasion for us, it's not the initial conquest that brings the trouble. Generally speaking, a more powerful country can and does invade and conquer a country, but it's the resistance and it's the guerrilla stuff that can mire you down and just bleed you. And that's what happens. That's what's going to happen in Yugoslavia. There's a certain person named Tito who's going to have something to say about the Germans feeling comfortable with their new conquest. And finally, a very interesting story happened on April 6, 1945. The Germans had quote unquote recruited a lot of nationalities, especially in the East, that were kind of anti-Soviet. There was a bunch of Georgian troops serving as volunteers on this island of Texel. Georgians, just so you know, are not rednecks, near Atlanta. Okay, they are, Gruzia is their name in Russian. It's translated Georgian into English, and they decided that these were Red Army soldiers who had been captured on the Eastern Front, and they were given a choice. Well, you can starve, you can go into a concentration camp, or you can volunteer for the German Army. Well, they volunteered for the German Army. Well, they decided they were going to take out their German masters or fellow soldiers, I suppose. So they killed 246 Germans in their sleep, and then a battle broke out, and it was approximately like 800 Germans died, about 500 Georgians died, and about 117 Dutch civilians there died. That fighting only ended after the war was already over when the Canadians arrived in the on May 20th, 1945. I will say this about Georgians. I've been to Georgia a few times. Know a lot of Georgians. Like I said, I've been living and enjoying going back and forth in the Soviet Union since 1989, but then it became Russia. Georgians are awesome people, but they love their daggers. So I imagine a lot of those daggers were used to cut the throats of the Germans when they made their initial attack. So don't screw around with Georgians. Okay, that was it for today. I appreciate your loyalty and interest in my video series, and I will see you tomorrow.